Well, we've waited until nearly the end to toot our own horn. In this half hour, we will combine 3 short presentations. I will kick things off detailing some of the barriers that the Whole Grains Council has overcome since its founding in 2003. And then Mallory Cushman will talk about the whole grain stamp and how it works and how it's working to make a difference. And then Kelly Toups, our program manager, will talk about what we're going to do next. There's always another act. I've had a lot of you say, when's the next conference? And it's sort of like, I have 2 kids. It's sort of like the old idea you're coming out of the delivery room and so somebody says, when are you going to have another one? Well, that's kind of how I feel right now. My answer to everyone has been, we will have another conference when there are compelling topics that really need addressing, as you know, there all were here, and when we recover from this one. So those are our 2 criteria. Usually about 18 to 24 months is the separation between whole grains conferences. So we'll see you all back then. But for now, we really do want to talk about what we're doing at the Whole Grains Council. So let me plow right into this. So we've had several barriers that we feel like we have overcome. When we started the Whole Grains Council in 2003, barriers to whole grains were everywhere. I want to review some of them today and how the work of Oldways and the Whole Grains Council have overcome some of these barriers. Now, first of all, the historic problems you know very well. From the retail side, there were very few whole grain products available. Manufacturers were inexperienced in formulating with whole grains. Consumers couldn't easily identify whole grain foods. I can say this in this room, but I'm so careful when I give media interviews. You never use a phrase like, whole grains used to taste like cardboard, and it's really changed because that people walk away with whole grains, cardboard. Yeah, I know that one. No, it really has changed hugely. And I once had somebody tell me that the reason it changed is because of the real low-carb craze in the whole Atkins 2004-ish period. After manufacturers worked to figure out how they could make a carbohydrate food, a grain food without any grains in it, making it with whole grains seemed a whole lot easier. So we got really good at that. But even then, consumers couldn't easily identify whole grain foods. So what did we do about each of these? We had solutions. We increased consumer demand through education. We created the whole grain stamp, and we incentivized new product development. Education, well, this is a natural for me. I used to be a kindergarten teacher, and one of my favorite parts of the job is when consumers call up and they have questions, and we can answer things by email, whatever. But education is also at the core of what Oldways does, so this is a natural for us. But of course, just increasing that demand doesn't do any good unless you're also working to help create supply by incentivizing new product development. Before the whole grain stamp, there wasn't any way for a manufacturer to get credit, quote unquote, for doing anything that was partially whole grain. And as we saw with Anna's presentation, you meet consumers where they are with partially whole grain, and when they get used to that, you up the ante. Well, before, when we only had the whole grain health claim, before the stamp, there was no way if somebody put partial whole grain in a product that people could say, hey, this is a step in the right direction. So the stamp has always provided that, and we have that little number on the bottom of how many grams of whole grain are in each serving. You'll hear more from Mallory. But that let people, we've had people call up and say, we've just reformulated our product. And we said, great, what brought that about? Well, our competitor had 20 grams, so, we needed to have 22 or whatever. So that little number does help kind of push the whole marketing up. But whole grain labeling was really not so simple to do if you think about it. We want to promote health. We want to help consumers find whole grains, but at the same time, we have to be complying with all regulations. Thank heavens, not as many as the school foods people do. And we have to provide incentives to industry to do the right thing. It has to work on all 3 levels, so pretty soon you get just this small area where it overlaps. And that's why it took us 1.5 years to actually create the whole grain stamp. We went through all kinds of iterations about what's going to be on it, what's it going to stand for, is it going to be % of the grain that's whole grain, is it a little gas gauge sort of thing, whatever. And finally our graphic designer came up with something that looked like a stamp, and we're all going, ooh, I think we're getting there. And that, of course, is where we ended up when we introduced the stamp in 2005. and then we changed over in 2006 to the phase 2 stamps with the gram-specific amount on there. But you look at that stamp and you go, oh yeah, and then they just came out with a stamp. Well, there was a little more to it than that, and it's always a little tricky. So once we get to that, the retail side, nutrition policy has still been a barrier. When we started in 2003, the guidelines in sway at that time, which were the 2000 guidelines, did not specify any kind of whole grain needs. It was this sort of meh thing that you heard about from our schools panel before. I was like, yeah, whole grains would be sort of a good idea, but if you don't get any, that's fine too, sort of thing in the 2000 guidelines. And then in 2005, we started this make at least half your grains whole. And a week later, we came out with the whole grain stamp. And we've always said they came out with the rules, and then we came out with the tools, and together that's what makes a difference. Yes, there was a change in nutrition policy, but you know what? They recommended more broccoli and beans too, and they didn't take off like whole grains did. So it takes a lot of things besides nutrition policy, but it is key. And we've seen during this period that not only the dietary guidelines have kicked in with a specification for whole grains, the WIC program didn't used to require whole grains, schools weren't required to serve whole grains, even though there is a law on the books that requires all federal nutrition programs to be in compliance with the dietary guidelines. The dietary guidelines changed in 2005. It took until 2012 before the school program changed. So it's all good eventually. Anyway, so solutions. We didn't make all this happen, but we were part of the momentum all along. We have gone to DC repeatedly to appear on panels and in front of USDA groups, to meet with CNPP, to meet with Food Nutrition Services, and so forth. We have repeatedly made comments when all of these new rules come up and say, yeah, maybe you should do this instead because here's how it's going to work. Just before the new guidelines came out, we had a couple of, I won't say moles, contacts at USDA who would say, Cynthia, they're about to say this, is there something that you can help us do to make it go in the direction that, so you get the policymakers and the dietitians who know where we want to go, and how can, what can you give us that will sway the day? So things like that happen that can make a difference. And so now we have this different ways of arriving at making half your grains whole in the dietary guidelines. We have typical comment lessons, and now we have these new school food rules. So this is another barrier that has fallen, in part because of the work that we have been doing for more than 10 years. There's another barrier, and this is a barrier that we are still paying a lot of attention to today. I think it's the one where we have come the least far. It's restaurants and food service. There is this perception that no one wants whole grains and the perception that no one serves whole grains. And we started beating away at this one in 2007 with a campaign we called Just Ask for Whole Grains. Because when we were researching this issue and we would talk to diners and say, hey, when you go to restaurants, do you ask for whole grains? They go, oh man, I do sometimes, but they never have them, so I just never even bother. And then you go to the restaurants and you go to and say to them, do you serve whole grains? And, well, we would if anybody ever asked for them. And you're going, somehow we have to get people asking. We have to break this vicious cycle and turn it into a virtuous cycle by encouraging people to ask. And we had a national campaign for a whole year where we had consumers, and we encouraged consumers to go in and ask for whole grains and report on their experience. There were little report cards they could give the manager of the store, and that's where the little Just Ask buttons that you saw on the front table, many of you are now wearing, came into play, and everybody liked them so much that we kept them. But there was an experience on the part of the staff with creating whole grain dishes. You can see Chef here. He is really quite frightened of those whole grains. But we saw those chefs on our panel on Sunday, and we see how far that has come as we try to work with people with education and with incentives in any way we can to break down these barriers. So we did our Just Ask campaign. We started our Whole Grains Challenge also in 2007. That was an annual food service award program. Our very first year, we had a wonderful entry from Virginia Tech. They created this Kernel Grain, whole grain boot camp. They gave away, they created 36 new whole grain dishes, put them out in their university cafeterias. They invited anybody who filed comment cards on those dishes to be in a drawing for a mountain bike, and they did just all kinds of things to get these kids more aware of whole grains. There were many creative things like that during the 6 years that we ran this program. And one reason we stopped it was because of success. One of the biggest participations we used to get was from schools, and we wanted to call out, shine a spotlight on these schools that were doing amazing things with whole grains, even though they weren't required. And then guess what? They're required. So, you can't say, oh, you're a winner, you're serving whole grains every day. Oh, you have to do that now. Well, great. So sometimes you can just say, okay, we made this push, and we declare victory and success, and we move on to whatever is the next thing. For us, this is another outreach thing. This year, you heard Colleen talk before. Her colleague, Mike Holloman, and I went out to the National Restaurant Show. I've spoken there many years. And we did this whole hands-on thing where we had local culinary students cook up all these grains, and we served samples, and we talked about what goes with what and flavor profiles. And that's part of reaching out and just saying, it's delicious, it's easy, it's cool, you want to be part of this. So those are some of the things we do, and it's happening in restaurants. We see the chains today. When you talk about, you say the word whole grains and everybody figures, oh, it's not going to look very attractive, I'm probably not going to like it. We have gotten past that. So you're getting advertisements like this on the websites of some of these chain restaurants who are now serving whole grains, and people are going to look at these and say, oh, wow, that actually looks pretty darn good. That looks delicious. Yeah, I want one of those. And this is quiz time. If you serve it, they will come. This is P.F. Chang's China Bistro and Pei Wei's Asian Diner, and they told us these statistics in 2007, and they've held pretty true. If they're serving 12 million pounds of white rice, at that same time, how much brown rice would you guess they're serving? Any guesses from the audience? 12 million on the white rice. What's it going to be? 6, 7, 6, 9, 12, 13, they're starting to go, okay. But this is really cool because when I used to start using this slide, people would say 1, 2. So your expectations have raised to begin with, but I'll show you what it is. About 45% of the rice they serve is brown rice, and this is because if you've been to a P.F. Chang's, you order your entree, and they come out and they say, would you like white rice or brown rice with that? It's equal. It's available. They don't have white rice on the table automatically. You say, oh, could I have brown rice? And they come back about a half hour later with the brown rice after all your other food is cold or you've eaten it. No, it's equally. If you serve it, if it's available. We saw that with Barilla. They put the whole grain bread first, and more people took it. You just make it clear that it's available, and you're going to see that people will vote with their fork. So that's cool. So there's another barrier. But for us, it's always about this balancing act. So you've got consumers on one side, you've got manufacturers and food service on one side. If we just worked as a nutrition education organization and did just the education part, you would be working on demand. And if you were really good, people would say, yeah, I got to do those whole grain things because Oldways says to do it. You'd be working on one part of the equation, but they would get to the store or the restaurant, and there wouldn't be any products there, and they go, well, shoot, I can't do this, forget it. At the same time, if you worked like a trade organization and just worked with manufacturers and somehow convinced them all to do the right thing, and then they put the products out there and nobody bought them because the education part wasn't done, then they would lose their shirts and say, well, that's the last time I listened to Harriman, and we would be in trouble. So we need to be raising up supply and demand at the same time, and that's what we feel we do at Oldways, which makes us a little different and special because we understand we have to be working with both sides of the equation to make it all work at the same time. But in the end, it's really people that are at the core of what motivates me to get up in the morning and go to work, because I really do enjoy getting this feedback from people and knowing that what we do does make a difference and does move that needle toward whole grains. So that's what we do at Oldways, and that's why we're proud of what we do. So I'll let Mallory now tell you about the whole grain stamp.
Am I on? Can you hear me? You're on. Okay. Well, for those of you that don't know me, I'm Mallory, and I am the STAMP Program Manager. and I talk to a lot of you on a daily basis. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about the stamp program, and hopefully you can all learn a little bit more about the stamp today. So in April 2002, a group of concerned millers, manufacturers, scientists, and of course chefs gathered in San Diego at a whole grain summit put on by Oldways, an organization committed to good health through cultural food traditions and lifestyles. Inspired by Oldways founder Kay Dunn Gifford, made plans to come together in order to promote increased consumption of whole grains. Together with Oldways, they organized the Whole Grains Council to develop and carry out a consumer education campaign and enlist others to join in this important and very exciting effort. When the Whole Grains Council first met in July 2003, they set these initial goals: to reach a scientific consensus on the definition of whole grains and on the health benefits of whole grains, and to advocate additional research about whole grains and health. Also, to educate the consumer about the benefits of whole grains and to help them find, buy, and cook whole grains. To help grain product companies, retailers, and restaurants meet the needs of health-conscious consumers with appealing products, and to serve as a link between science, industry, and consumers. In the decades since these goals were set, we have met these goals and we have certainly exceeded them. We've grown from 9 members to over 375, many of whom are in this room right now. We've created a dynamic and ever-growing website. We've managed a continuing campaign to educate the media and the public about the health benefits and delicious taste of whole grains. And of course, we've launched the stamp. So today we define our mission in these 3 parts: to help consumers find whole grain foods and understand their health benefits, and to help manufacturers and restaurants create delicious whole grain foods, and to help the media write accurate, compelling stories about whole grains. Bless you. So as many of you know, the whole grain stamp comes in 2 versions. We've got the basic stamp and the whole grains, and the 100% whole grain stamp. The basic stamp, which is on 69% of the products registered with the Whole Grains Council, can be used on products that may contain some refined grains and, in addition to a significant amount of whole grain, at least 8 grams. The 100% stamp is used on products where all of the grain is whole grain, and the product contains a minimum of 16 grams of whole grain per serving. So if you do the math on that 69%, that means 31% have 100% stamp, and it's a pretty big number. Both the basic stamp and the 100% stamp denote the number of grams of whole grain in serving of the product, providing the consumer with the most accurate information. So to give you a quick timeline and some major milestones, you can take a look at this, but the Whole Grains Council and the stamp program have met several exciting milestones since the Whole Grains Council first met in 2003, including the official unveiling of the stamp to members and media in 2004 and its first appearance on products in 2005. In 2006, the stamp became an even more valuable resource when the gram-specific graphic was introduced. And then soon after, in 2007, the Whole Grains Council announced that September, which we just had, was Whole Grains Month, followed by the first foreign language stamp in 2008. Momentum continued, and in 2012, the Whole Grains Council celebrated the first Whole Grain Sampling Day, which some of you might remember was on a duck boat in Boston, among other things. And then most recently, we hit a major milestone that I'm particularly proud of for all of us. We have 10,000 stamped products. Thank you. The Whole Grains Council stamp is being sold in 20% of countries around the world. It's easy to see that the whole grain stamp is taking the world by storm. While the stamp was originally meant to be a domestic program, demand for foreign language stamps increased, and the stamp is currently used in over 40 countries around the world. And it's working. Membership to the Whole Grains Council continues to rise steadily, as is the number of stamped products. We have now exceeded 10,000 by quite a bit, and so do sales of stamped products. We continue to engage with our members, with consumers, and with the media to provide compelling information, awareness, and to create exciting events and promotions, which Kelly will now tell you about.
Okay. My name is Kelly Toups, and I am a registered dietitian, and I'm also the program manager here at the Whole Grains Council. Among my roles of answering questions for consumers, helping them to find whole grains, answering questions for the media when they want to write articles about whole grains, another one of the big things that I do is to help plan whole grain promotions. So today I'm going to talk to you about some of the things we have coming up in 2015. The first big thing is Whole Grain Sampling Day. It's held every year the first Wednesday in April. So this year it will be April 1st, 2015. No joke. And it's basically for food service, manufacturers, teachers, really anyone. And the goal is to get as many people as possible to try whole grains. And so it coordinates independent activities all across the country. And really, we work with you to help fit Whole Grain Sampling Day into your existing marketing plans. We're really here to be a resource to you in order to show consumers, hey, this company has whole grains. They're doing great. You should give them a try. So we really help publicize your plans and support you. Here are some ways that Whole Grain Sampling Day has been celebrated in the past. We've had demos, quizzes, some coupons, really whatever works best for the organization. It's all about making it work for them. And what are your goals? Some people want to encourage repeat visits to their site, so they'll work with coupons. Or some companies want customers to engage with their brand, so they'll have quizzes or contests. And then others, just like at schools, or have a more educational component that want people to try different things. And so really it's whatever works best for you. Already for 2015, we already have some participants that are committed, such as the ones you see up here. And each company is kind of taking a different approach to what works for them. And if any of you in this room would like to get involved, I put my email right here, Kelly, Kelly, @oldwayspt.org. I would love to hear from any of you about what we can do for you to help break down the barriers to whole grains. And so I'm really excited about our early commitments, and I am definitely anticipating many more. Other things coming up in 2015, we really want to expand our support materials for schools. I get emails from administrators, school nurses, teachers, dietitians, and we're already seeing, as we heard today, whole grains in the cafeteria. Kids are already getting exposed there, and we just want to help make that transition as seamless as possible. Also, people have seen a lot of success stories about schools that are integrating not only whole grains in the cafeteria, but in classrooms or in after-school programs. So really the goal is to kind of be a hub for whole grains education. So kind of making a place on our website where people can really go easily for all of this information. Another thing is Whole Grains Month. It is celebrated every September, and every year it's done a little bit differently. This past year we had a recipe contest where select bloggers created whole grains recipes using different whole grains, and then the public voted on their favorites. And those 5 favorites, Mallory and I and Janet cooked it up at her house, and then we had a panel of guest judges to pick the winners. Even though it's almost a year away, we're already thinking about next year, and we put together a few ideas, and these are just the 3 that we have so far, but would definitely love your input. Our 3 finalist ideas are baking with whole grains, so kind of to target home bakers across the country. We've had some people all this weekend talk about their success using whole grains and baked goods, and that's where we would focus our efforts, and then perhaps having a winner maybe win a trip to King Arthur or something like that. So that could be fun. Another option is going along with our whole grains school support idea is to kind of put together classroom materials and coupons for teachers throughout the month so that they can incorporate whole grains into their lesson plans. And there have been some really inspiring stories across the country about that. So just giving people the tools that they need, and then maybe picking an after-school care organization or something like that to win a case of whole grain goodies. Our sponsors are always wonderful about helping out with that. The last idea is to work with Girl Scouts and Boy Scouts to create a curriculum for them to earn a nutrition or whole grain badge, and then a chance for them to perhaps also win whole grains for their troop as well. So we have several different ideas here. Lastly, the next big goal for either late 2015 or early 2016 is to host a food service workshop. And really the vision is for food service leaders to be able to go to this workshop and work hands-on with whole grain products. Because as we've heard, there's different barriers to working with new ingredients that people might not be familiar with. But we know that there are several companies that have, such as Barilla, chefs on hand that are really experts on helping people work with their products. So that's an idea for the future, and we would love to help food service make the switch to whole grains and increase their offerings. So I guess kind of a question to think about as you go home this week is vendors and manufacturers, how can you help? Do you have a product that would be great for food service? Do you make a piece of equipment that makes cooking whole grains super easy? What can you do to help food service slowly transition towards more and more whole grains? So that's what I have lined up in the coming year, and thank you.